NVIDIA made $120 billion in profit last year. Then it took that cash and did something that looks insane. It spent tens of billions buying back its own stock instead of paying you a dividend. Why would a company do that? By the end of this, I will show you the one signal hidden inside this buyback that tells you whether we are in an AI bubble or not. Most people are staring at the wrong number, at the loud one, the one in the headline. I will also give you 8 questions. Run any buyback from any company through them, and you will read management's real intentions like they are texting them to you. NVIDIA is just our case study today. And stick around for the part about why NVIDIA paid a dividend of 1 single cent for years. 1 cent. That 1 cent quietly tells you more than the $80 billion headline ever will. First, the fuel. Because you cannot understand the buyback without the cash behind it. These are NVIDIA's own audited numbers. Fiscal 2024, revenue of $61 billion, profit of $30 billion. Then, fiscal 2025, revenue of $130 billion, up 114% in a single year, profit of $73 billion. And then fiscal 2026, revenue of $216 billion, profit of $120 billion. Sit with that for a second. Sales more than doubled in 1 year at a company already worth more than almost anything on earth. Numbers this size have simply never grown this fast in the history of business. Now look closer, because here is the number that really matters. NVIDIA turned $216 billion of sales into $130 billion of operating profit. That is roughly a 60% operating margin. A 60% margin on physical hardware is almost unheard of. Software companies dream of that number. A company that makes actual chips in actual factories is not supposed to earn like this. And that single number is why this whole story is either a miracle or a trap. Quick reset so nobody is lost. A buyback is a company using its own cash to buy its own shares off the open market and then retire them. The pie does not get any bigger, it just gets cut into fewer slices. Let me make that concrete. Imagine a company earns $100 and there are 100 shares. That is $1 of earnings per share. Now it buys back 10 shares. The same $100 is split across just 90 shares. Earnings per share jumps from $1 to about $1.11. The company did not earn a single extra dollar. But every remaining share suddenly looks more valuable. That is the mechanical heart of every buyback on earth. And here is your first rule. A buyback is not generosity, it is a choice. Management stood at a fork with a mountain of cash and picked its own stock over building factories, over research, over acquisitions, over paying down debt, over a dividend. Always ask, why this over everything else? Now watch the pattern, because the pattern is where the real story lives. August 2023, the board authorizes $25 billion for buybacks. August 2024, another $50 billion. August 2025, another $60 billion. And May 2026, another $80 billion. That is over $215 billion in permission to buy its own stock in under 3 years. To put that in perspective, that is more than the entire market value of most companies in the S&P 500 on buying back one single stock. But here is the trap that almost everyone falls into. Watch the gap between what they announced and what they actually spent, because those are two very different things. In fiscal 2025, NVIDIA authorized $50 billion. It actually spent $34 billion and left almost $39 billion sitting right there, unused, authorized but never touched. So here is your second rule. An authorization is not spending. It is a permission slip, a ceiling, not a check. The headline screams $80 billion. The real number that leaves the building is always smaller, and that gap is deliberate. So why announce a giant number you do not fully intend to spend? To answer that, we have to talk about the 5 separate games being played inside this one buyback. Because real companies run several of them at the same time. Strategy 1. Offsetting dilution. And this one is sneaky. NVIDIA pays its employees enormous amounts of company stock. That is called stock-based compensation. And every year, all that new employee stock quietly increases the total share count, which dilutes you, the existing owner. Your slice of the pie gets a little thinner without you doing anything. So a huge part of the buyback is not shrinking the pie at all. It is just running up the down escalator, spending billions simply to keep the share count flat against all that employee stock. That leads straight to your third rule. Always check whether the buyback is actually reducing the number of shares or just cancelling out dilution. If the share count barely falls despite tens of billions spent, the buyback is a treadmill, not a gift. Strategy 2. Signaling confidence. A board only authorizes $80 billion if it genuinely believes the cash will keep flowing and that its own stock is worth buying. It is the single most expensive way in the world to say, "We are not worried." Strategy 3. Soaking up excess cash. This is the big one for NVIDIA. The AI boom threw off far more money than the business could physically reinvest. You can only build so many facilities, hire so many people, so fast. A buyback becomes the release valve for a company that is, quite literally, drowning in cash, with nowhere operational left to put it. When you cannot spend it fast enough on the business, you hand it back to shareholders. Strategy 4. Tax efficiency. And this one is so important that it is the whole reason NVIDIA avoided a real dividend for years. Hold that thought tight, because we are about to build an entire chapter on it. Strategy 5. Price support. A standing buyback puts a large, patient, price-insensitive buyer directly underneath the stock. When the price dips, the company can lean in and buy more. It does not set a hard floor, but it absolutely softens the falls. Now, the question everyone circles, and almost nobody answers well. NVIDIA had the cash to pay a truly massive dividend. Instead, for years, it paid 1 single cent per share, 1 cent, while earning $120 billion. Why so little? The answer reveals exactly how the company sees itself. Reason 1. Taxes, and this is the big one. A dividend is taxed the instant it lands in your account. Whether you wanted the cash that quarter or not, you get a bill every single time. A buyback works differently. It lifts the share price instead, and you pay no tax at all until you choose to sell. Same value delivered, but now you control the timing of your own tax bill. For long-term holders, that is a genuinely better deal. Reason 2. Flexibility. A dividend is a promise. Once you start paying one, cutting it later is read by the market as a disaster. It can absolutely crater the stock. So a dividend is a handshake you cannot easily break. A buyback carries no such obligation. NVIDIA can buy hard one quarter and quietly pause the next, and nobody panics. In a young, violently cyclical business like AI chips, that freedom to start and stop is priceless. Reason 3, and this is the real one, the deep one. A big dividend is what mature, slowing companies pay. Think utilities, banks, old industrials, companies whose growth is mostly behind them. A large dividend quietly tells the market, our best days of growth are over, so here, take the cash instead. And a company still compounding at NVIDIA speed absolutely refuses to send that message. So leaning on buybacks instead of dividends is management standing up and shouting, we are still a growth story, not a tired yield stock. That gives you your fourth rule. The buyback versus dividend mix tells you which chapter of its life a company believes it is in. Reason 4, the uncomfortable one. Executives are very often paid on earnings per share targets. Buybacks cut the share count and lift earnings per share. Dividends do neither. So there is a built-in incentive for management to prefer the buyback, even when the stock might be expensive, which is exactly why you always keep a little healthy skepticism about it. Reason 5, buybacks fight dilution and dividends simply cannot. Remember all that employee stock inflating the share count? A dividend does absolutely nothing about it. A buyback mops it directly up. For a company that pays its people in stock as heavily as NVIDIA, the buyback pulls double duty a dividend never could. So then why on earth did NVIDIA suddenly break its own rule? Because in 2026, it raised that dividend 25-fold, from 1 cent all the way to 25 cents per share. Read that move carefully because it is a confession. When a company that dodged dividends for years finally commits to a real one, it is admitting the cash has grown so enormous and so reliable that it no longer fears the promise. And notice, crucially, it did not replace the buybacks with the dividend. It stacked the dividend on top of them, both at once. And that is the first quiet, unmistakable sign that a hyper-growth company is beginning to mature. So now, the question you actually came here for. If you suspect we are living through an AI bubble, what does this buyback truly tell you? Because it is real evidence, but it cuts both ways, and honest analysis has to hold both sides at once. Here is the bull case, the optimistic read. This is not a dot-com company burning through borrowed venture money, the way they did back in 1999. Back then, companies with no profit spent cash they did not have. NVIDIA is the opposite. It buys its stock with earned profit, $120 billion of it, generated from real chips sold to real customers at a 60% margin. A true bubble company simply cannot do this. It has no profit to return in the first place. Now the bear case. And here I have to argue against everything I just said, because this is the side that quietly costs people the most money. A buyback of an overpriced stock destroys value. Full stop. If NVIDIA buys its own shares near an all-time high and the AI trade later deflates, it will have tossed tens of billions of dollars buying at the very top. That money is simply gone. And here is the sharpest edge of the whole argument. Cash paid out to you as a dividend cannot vanish to a falling share price. It is in your pocket. But cash the company spent buying its own stock high absolutely can vanish. In a bubble, buybacks carry a risk that dividends simply do not. Add one more hard truth. A large slice of NVIDIA's revenue comes from just a handful of giant customers, all pouring money into AI at the same time. If their spending is itself the bubble, then the profit and the buyback funded by that profit is resting on that very same foundation. A buyback can never be safer than the sales underneath it. So here is the signal I promised you, right at the start. The buyback proves the profit is real today. It does not prove the profit is durable tomorrow. Those are two completely different claims, and the buyback only ever speaks to the first one. By choosing buybacks over dividends, NVIDIA is effectively rebetting its returned cash on its own share price over and over. In a real lasting boom, that is the ultimate vote of confidence. Near a top, it is the ultimate exposure. The buyback cannot tell you which, only the durability of the sales can. Now do not forget the mind games, because a buyback is aimed at your brain just as much as your wallet. Investors cannot see the future, so instead they watch what insiders do with their money. A giant buyback reads as, the people who know this business best think the stock is cheap. That belief alone can lift the price, sometimes more than the actual math ever does. And near a possible top, that very same signal is the perfect way to keep a nervous crowd calm and holding. Then there is the anchoring game, announcing $80 billion plans, an enormous number in every mind, and it quietly changes the subject. From, is this stock overvalued, to, wow, look how much cash they are returning. That is your sixth rule. Notice when a buyback headline is being used to change the conversation. And underneath it all sits the incentive. Management gets paid on earnings per share, and buybacks lift earnings per share. So always ask whose bonus the buyback is really serving. In a bubble, when the stock is already expensive, that temptation is at its most dangerous. So what should you actually watch from here to know which way this breaks? Watch the share count, quarter after quarter. If it truly falls, the buyback is real. If it just treads water against employee stock, be honest with yourself about that. Watch the price they pay and whether the cash flow keeps up. And watch that dividend. If NVIDIA keeps raising it, that is the company itself quietly telling you the wild growth chapter is closing and the mature one is opening. So here are the 8 questions. Screenshot this board because this is the whole framework in one place. Question 1. Authorized or actually spent? Question 2. Is the share count really falling? Question 3. At what price are they buying? Question 4. Buyback or dividend and why? Question 5. Funded by profit or by debt? Question 6. How durable is the revenue underneath? Question 7. What is management paid on? And question 8. What is the shift over time? So here is the final read on NVIDIA. Revenue climbing from 61 to 216 billion. Profit from 30 to 120. Buybacks authorized bigger and bigger, but spent steadily and with discipline. Funded entirely by earned cash, and only then, at last, a real dividend. That is the exact signature of a company crossing over from pure hypergrowth into a cash return machine. It is a genuine turning point, and most people watching the headlines will miss it entirely. The AI bubble question is not settled by any of this, and I will not pretend it is. But the choice tells you something honest. By buying its own stock instead of paying it out, NVIDIA keeps rebetting its cash on its own share price. In a real boom, that is confidence. Near a top, that is exposure. Which one it turns out to be is the bet you have to price for yourself. So remember the whole point of this. A dividend is a promise. A buyback is a choice. The buyback itself is neutral. It is just a tool. In a cheap, cash-rich company, it builds enormous value. In an expensive one chasing a bonus, it quietly burns it. The number in the headline never tells you which of those is happening, but the 8 questions do. A buyback is management talking. And now, you know exactly how to listen, even while everyone else is just standing there shouting bubble.